Hi everyone and welcome, and I really appreciate you all joining us again today. Just before we get started, as always, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the lands of which we're all meeting today and pay respects to elders past and present. The reason why we're getting together today, we thought it was really timely. There's just so much going on out in the world. There's a lot of noise, whether it's what's going on in the broader world, what's going on in Australia from an economy perspective, and of course, most recently, the announcements with the budget, and there were some really big announcements. So we're just trying to unpack a little bit, how does that all make sense for people and what does it mean for you specifically? So that's the attempt today. We really thank so many of you for jumping on board. I think we've got close to 4,000 people with us today, so it shows that it's really topical. And we have had lots of questions coming through. So we want to keep this as much about you as possible. So please keep the questions coming through. So you can submit the questions through the Q&A panel. We may not get to everything, obviously, during the session, but if you've asked something, what we will do is, if it's really personal in nature, we'll get one of our planners to actually give you a call back and chat that through. Or if it's a general question, we'll answer those and post those on our website. Today's session will also be recorded, so you can either share it with your friends or come back and watch it again. Obviously, there'll be a lot of information in here, but we'll try and get as many of those answers out to you as possible. A quick reminder, I'll be in trouble if I don't do this. It is general information only. You will have seen the disclaimer slide right at the beginning there. Everything that we say today is general information only. We might touch on some things, some concepts that you might like to apply for yourself. We just highly recommend, if you're going to do that, maybe have a chat with one of our planners. We've got plenty that you can certainly have a chat to, and make sure that it's really applicable to you and your circumstances. But things that are said in here are just general in nature. You're probably seeing next to me some really wonderful guests, and I'm so incredibly excited to have and welcome the wonderful Alan Kohler today. A very familiar face for us, nearly 30 years, I think it was, on the ABC, and making sure, I think we all remember the finance reports and the charts that went up during that time. Has gone on to do lots of other things, obviously being the editor of the AFR and the Age, and launching, and was a co-founder of the Eureka Report and Business Spectator, and today writes for the ABC still and the Money Cafe podcast. So very much a big welcome to Alan.
Thanks, Kat.
Thank you. And we've got the wonderful Dan with us here again. Dan is one of our financial planners and leads our financial planning team, and is here to help us contextualise some of these concepts. So Dan is the man who can actually give us some answers on what this means from an advice perspective, and one of the guys that you actually can come and have a yarn to if you want to actually start applying this to your own world. So we'll get into it. I mean, there's an awful lot going on at the moment. I think I don't think a budget has been spoken about quite so much as this one in a few years. But I'd like to start right at the top, because I think you don't really have to go far in your conversations with friends, family, or certainly us when we do with members, to get this sense that people are a little bit overwhelmed by just how much stuff is coming at people. We've had a lot going on globally. That's now manifesting in Australia. We've had cost of living, rising housing affordability, fuel prices. It's all really bearing down on people as they're trying to make decisions, especially the decisions that people might be making about whether to retire or not. So if we could start right at the top, can you help us sort of cut through the noise a little bit on what's going on, or what has happened globally, and how that's filtering into
globally?
Australia?
You want to start globally?
Yeah, let's go right up there. Can we? Yeah, there's been from tariffs to everything, wars.
Okay, so there are two things going on globally that I think you need to focus on. Obviously, there's the war in Iran, which has closed the Strait of Hormuz since February the 28th. So that's kind of 3 months, we're a bit more than 3 months on now. Part of the problem with the Strait of Hormuz thing is that every kind of week or so, Donald Trump says he's going to do a deal tomorrow with Iran, right? And that hasn't yet eventuated. And today and last night, they were shooting at each other again with missiles. So it doesn't look like there's a deal happening. So the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. That has taken 10 million barrels per day out of global supply, which is quite a lot. It's about 10% of demand. and the International Energy Agency has called this the greatest disruption to oil supplies and energy supplies in general in world history.
Mm.
So
Moment.
that's a big deal, right? It's a big deal, and obviously what everyone wants is for the Strait of Hormuz to reopen as soon as possible. And the other thing that's going on is artificial intelligence.
Mm.
And so what that's done is, in a sense, particularly in the last couple of months, it's overwhelmed what would otherwise be a very negative impact on markets of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Since March the 30th, really, you can look at a chart of this. If you Google a chart of world stocks or the S&P 500 or whatever, you'll find that it bottomed on March the 30th, and that ended about 9 months or so of the artificial intelligence, the AI boom, having a bit of a rest. It just kind of had a layoff, and then from that day, for some reason that I haven't been able to really identify, it took off again.
Mm.
And so really what's happened in the part, for April and May, what happened was a third leg of the AI bubble.
Mm.
And it's been colossal.
Mm.
So the S&P 500, the main US share market, since that day has gone up 20% in 2 months. The AI stocks assembled, there's NVIDIA and Google and all these, Microsoft and that, they're all up 35% in 2 months. I mean, that's 2 years worth of increase, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, wow. So this last 2 months has kind of shocked everyone. Now the question is, and I do think this is the biggest question, is this bubble about to burst? That's the question. And the thing is that if anyone tells you they know and it's going to burst or it's not going to burst, they're lying. They don't know. Nobody knows.
No crystal balls for anyone.
Well, no, nobody knows. I mean, I don't know. I do know that it's different this time than in the internet bubble of the 1990s, which obviously everyone kind of remembers. And that's because in those days, the companies whose share prices were soaring weren't making much money.
Mm.
Right? So the share prices were going up without the profits being made. This time, the profits are there.
Yeah.
Right? All these companies are making tons of money.
Mm.
Right? And in fact, if you look at, I looked at this morning at a graph that compares the 90s with now, and the main stock that went up in the 1990s was Cisco, and now it's NVIDIA, the chip maker. NVIDIA's share price has actually gone up a bit less than it should have, according to the earnings it's making. Whereas Cisco's share price went up far more than it should have.
So it's really interesting, this dynamic. We've got pressure, certainly the war, and gosh, it's hard to keep up with what's actually going on there. That's sort of creating this pressure around fuel prices, and then you've got markets behaving in ways that are unpredictable really at the moment, and sort of really new territory for a lot of people. When we filter that down into what's going on here in Australia and in the economy, we hear from our members all the time about cost of living, housing affordability. I think that's top of the pops for members all the time. What are the forces at play in that market? Why are our members and Australians feeling that?
Well, look, I do think the number one thing is housing affordability. That kind of, in a sense, underlies the whole cost of living problem. But even those who don't, are paying off a large mortgage or trying to deal with having bought an expensive house, are dealing with reasonably high inflation. Inflation's back at 4.2%. Prices are rising, have been rising. So you've got the two things, and then now lately we've got fuel prices going up quite a lot. And so all those things are compounding now and really kind of hitting people hard, I think.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We did have a question come through earlier from one of our members, and so I'll read it because it's a great one. Why does the RBA keep raising interest rates in general terms? how should people think about the role of interest rates in managing inflation? Are there any other things the RBA could be doing? I think this question sort of speaks to, gosh, we're copying it on housing, we're copying it on mortgage payments. Cost of everything is going up. How much more squeeze can we put on people with raising interest rates? And is there anything else in the RBA's sort of armoury for fixing that?
Yeah, okay. So it's probably good to just step back a bit. And the Reserve Bank has a law, as you know, part of the Reserve Bank Act. And it's got two things that it needs to do under its act. It's got to control inflation, and it's got to pursue full employment, whatever that might mean. And the trouble is that, you know, when I was a kid, full employment meant 2% unemployment. But nowadays it doesn't mean that.
No.
It means 4% unemployment, 4.5%. You know, like it's vaguely defined. And so that means that the RBA is kind of comfortable with unemployment where it is 4.5%. You know, that's kind of where it ought to be. But inflation, it's decided, needs to be between 2 and 3%, and preferably 2.5%. So, and that's you know, a fairly long-standing that target, inflation target, was actually introduced in 1992. So, you know, well after the Reserve Bank was created in the 1960s. But still, that's what they've decided now is where they ought to be, and that's really in line with all the other central banks around the world. They reckon that their main job is to control inflation. And the one thing they've got, the one tool they've got, is to move interest rates. That's it. So, you know, when all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right?
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people write to me all the time saying, well, why don't they just move the GST up and down? Or why don't they do this? Or, you know, there's some other things you can do. All that's true, except that the Reserve Bank doesn't have control of that, those things. And then you can say, well, why don't we give them control of it? Well, that's a political decision. I think the politicians just want to leave this alone. They don't want to have anything to do with it. And so that's where we're at. The way that monetary policy works is that when you put up interest rates, those who have a mortgage tend to cut back their spending more than those who don't have a mortgage and who are winners out of interest rates going up. So people who've got savings, when interest rates go up, they're winners, right?
Yeah, there's winners and losers.
That's right.
High interest.
But what happens is that the people who have a mortgage and are the losers, they cut back more than the winners increase their spending.
Gotcha.
So by putting up interest rates, the Reserve Bank tends to dampen consumer demand, which has a dampening effect on the economy. And that's really all the Reserve Bank can do.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's been a lot of chatter, maybe rumour, substantiated or not, but it's an interesting one of, you know, with where we're at, where inflation's at, unemployment's at, you know, the one tool that the RBA has in terms of trying to get that to a point that they're comfortable, that we're all comfortable. Are we on the precipice of recession? Are we headed there? Like, what would be the signs that we should be looking for?
So the economic situation is now, and we got this yesterday, in fact, with the national accounts came out yesterday, the GDP for the March quarter. It takes the Australian statisticians quite a long time to cough up their stats for each quarter. It's now 2 months on, right? Since the end of the March quarter.
Of course it is, yeah, of course.
We tend to pretend that it's just happened, right? But it's worth noting that the Chinese statisticians, they come up with their GDP numbers 2 weeks after the end of the quarter.
Might be using AI, yeah.
No, I think they make it up. They start with the answer, right? And then they work backwards.
Yeah, agreed, yeah.
And they have to do the answer that the Communist Party wants, but anyway.
We might leave that one alone. But yes, back to Australia.
So the statisticians take 2 months. They come up with their GDP number for the quarter, and they've done that yesterday for the March quarter. It was 0.3% change for the quarter and 2.5% over the 12 months to the end of March. So that was a bit slower. What we're in now is a slowdown. The economy is slowing down. The Reserve Bank itself is predicting that the GDP growth this year for the whole year will be 1.3%, which is half of what it was last year. So they're predicting a halving of economic growth. Some people, not many, are predicting a recession. I'm not. I don't think there'll be a recession. But I do think, we're in for a slowdown. And the reason the economy is slowing down is because the Reserve Bank wants it to.
Yeah.
They're going to make sure it does.
Take the pressure out of the system.
Well, they've decided that the economy has to slow down in order to control inflation, and so they've put up interest rates 3 times this year. They cut them 3 times last year. I think the fact that they've now increased interest rates 3 times this year, having fairly recently cut them, means that those cuts were a mistake. They shouldn't have done it.
And out of cycle with potentially other parts of the world.
That's right. So inflation was still rising last year. The Reserve Bank, God bless them, they were trying to keep unemployment as low as possible. And good on them, I reckon. But it was a mistake. They've now had to turn around and start increasing rates again, and I think that's been a problem. So probably the best way to think about it is that interest rates have gone up 16 times in total since May 2022.
Yeah, right.
And within that 16 times, there have been 3 rate cuts that shouldn't have happened, but anyway, they did, and here we are. And so the net change to interest rates is 13 increases.
Right.
And anyway.
And so when we think about that, because it's 2 sides of the same coin for households, right? If we're thinking about it, it's either inflation's going up and everything we buy is getting more expensive, which creates pressure on cost of living, or you've got interest rates, like to your point, there's winners and losers in that, but the vast majority of people with mortgages, that creates a pressure that then reduces spending on the other side and hopefully reduces costs overall for everybody. That's the main game. But how far do you think interest rates will actually go? Knowing that most of our members, online probably have a mortgage, and if you're in retirement enjoying high interest rates, that's excellent. But, a lot of people do have mortgages that they're trying to meet. Is it 5? Is it 5.25? I know you don't have a crystal ball, but it's going to go further, isn't it?
Look, I don't think it will, actually. I think that the cash rate, the one that the Reserve Bank moves around, is now 4.35%. I reckon that's where it'll stay. I mean, the market, the futures market, which is people who, basically the futures market is where people bet on stuff. And, people are betting that there'll be one more rate hike this year.
Yeah, great.
So that's what the market's saying. Among the economists who predict these things, who I talk to, I'd say probably 2/3 of them, I guess, predicting one more rate hike. About 1/3 of them are with me, saying that there won't be many more rate hikes. And yesterday's GDP data really confirmed with me that they don't need to increase interest rates anymore. So I think I personally think that's it.
Yeah, so that's good news for people online. It means that if interest rates hold, that's fantastic for them, and it's a signal potentially that they've done what they need to do, and that cost of living and might get back under control with inflation.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's no good if you think that your interest rate that you're paying is too high. You're struggling to meet it. Yeah. What that, I suppose, is saying is that it's not going to come down.
Yeah.
I think that's true. It hasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think, broadly speaking, and this is globally, not just Australia, we're entering in a higher interest rate environment. The days of 2% cash rate or less are finished. And, in those days, mortgage rates were quite low, like you could get a mortgage for 2% at one stage when in the pandemic, you could lock in a fixed rate mortgage, couldn't you, Dan, for 2.5%? I mean, those were the days, but that's over now, and I don't think it'll ever happen again.
Yeah. We've actually just had a live question, and Dan, I'm going to bring you into the convo in a second, but we had a live question come through, which I think is a good one. I understand RBA can also print money as a tool to manage the economy. Is that true?
Yes. Well, in fact, what is true is that the Reserve Bank prints money all the time. So the way the system works is that when the government has a bill to pay, it actually tells the Reserve Bank to pay the bill. It doesn't give the Reserve Bank money to pay the bill with.
Yeah, right.
The Reserve Bank pays the bill.
Got you.
With money that it's printed. And then the government takes money out of the system with taxes.
Yeah, I need one of these printing machines.
That's right. No, look. So the Reserve Bank is the outfit that prints money, and so what they did during the pandemic, in order to get long-term interest rates down, is they printed money and they bought long-term bonds, right? Government bonds.
Mm-hmm.
And the purpose of that printing the money during the pandemic and COVID was in order to bring down long-term interest rates as well. So they don't actually control long-term interest rates in the same way as they control short-term interest rates, because they actually set the cash rate, right? They decide what is the cash rate going to be, and that's what it is. But with long-term interest rates, whether it's 5 or 10 years, they are set by the market. And in order to control that, the Reserve Bank has to go into the market and buy or sell those securities, right? Mm-hmm. And so what they did in the pandemic was that they printed a whole bunch of money and they went and bought these securities in order to drive the interest rate down.
Got you. And that's where we ended up with 2%. Fascinating. Dan, I am going to bring you in because you've been sitting there so patiently and listening. I guess the outtake of all of this is, we've just said that interest rates actually affect people in different ways. So some people will be absolutely thrilled that interest rates will either hold or, hopefully go down over time. Other people, want it to be as high as possible because they're relying on some of that income. In these, I think its longer term impact on what that all then does on cost of living in particular. I mean, I think that's the big thing on people's minds when they're retiring, right? Is cost of living. How do I make sense of this from an income perspective? What's your thoughts, or what would you, if this is feeling overwhelming or uncertain, what would you say to people?
Yeah, I would say that if you're feeling overwhelmed, it's probably a good sign that it's a good time to get engaged with your super and look at what options you've got. When we're thinking about these types of concepts, they're really hard to predict in the short term, but when we're talking about a long-term investment strategy, and for an average retiree at 65, they've still potentially got 20 years. So it's a long investment time frame. We know that there are going to be multiple changes that are going to come up. So you can't plan directly, but we can prepare, or we can plan for unforeseen things, and we can budget these into your actual plan. So what I would say is don't do it alone. We're here to support you, and we can help you think about how these challenges can be built into your broader plan. Because yes, when you reach retirement, you've got to figure out your restructure, but also what you're going to have to do is think about the longevity. And if we're looking at higher cost of living and the longevity of your money, that means that you're going to have to balance out what that looks like. But it can be done, and we can support you so you don't have to do it alone.
Awesome. Actually, we've got some ripper questions coming in. This is a good one. And it's not the first time I've actually had this suggestion. I'm sure you've got a view on it. So productivity is on the decline, households are struggling, et cetera. Doesn't this indicate that we're already in a recession? Well, there's a technical definition of a recession, but surely a better tool to stem inflation is to increase the GST rate so it impacts everyone, and you would have more control over day-to-day purchases. What's your view on that one?
Look, theoretically, that's true. It would have a better effect. I think probably moving the GST up and down would be a nightmare for retailers, I think.
Yeah, true. Implementation would.
I mean, I just think it would be terrible. And I also think, well, that's the main thing. I mean, you're never going to get politicians to do it. You'd have to give the GST rate to an independent body like the Reserve Bank.
Yeah. And
that's a big deal. That's a big thing to do, right? I mean, our GST rate at 10%, in my opinion, is too low. The OECD average for GSTs is 20%. So we're half the
standard. We're
half the average around the world, a lot of OECD countries for GST. So we could definitely afford to increase it and have less pressure on income tax. I think one of the problems we have in Australia is we're getting too much money from income tax, which is kind of affecting a lot of the people watching today. I mean, the people, people in middle income, they're paying too much tax, too much income tax. And the thing about a GST is that everyone has to pay it.
Yeah. Yes. And it's optional on what you pay.
That's right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Or what you buy. It probably leads us to some of the budget questions that we've had. Obviously, it was a big budget. There was some big announcements, and there's certainly been a lot of chatter about it since. What's your? I mean, I know you've had a lot of thoughts and you've been talking about it a lot, but what's your initial thoughts on the changes and how it might impact the type of people that are watching today?
Well, so the big changes are the change to the way capital gains tax is calculated.
Yep.
and also negative gearing. Now, I wrote a book about housing a couple of years ago, and in doing the book, I tried to identify when did housing affordability start to go haywire? When did that happen?
Yeah.
And the answer was the year 2000 was when house prices at that moment began increasing at twice the rate of incomes. Up until that point, incomes and house prices basically increased at about the same rate, 3% a year, roughly 3.5% a year. And then from then on, house prices started going up by 6% a year. And with that happening for 25 years, we've ended up with house prices being twice the ratio to incomes that they were back then, right?
Yeah.
So the year 2000, 1999, the average house price in Australia was 4 times the average income, and now it's 8 times. And so that's massive. That's changed everything about society, really. It's changed the economy, it's changed how we live. And so that in doing the book, I thought, well, okay, what the hell happened in 2000 that caused that? And the thing that jumped out at me was that in the end of 1999, they changed the way capital gains tax was calculated from being an adjustment to inflation. So up until that point, capital gains tax was introduced in 1985 by Hawke and Keating. The deal then was that you paid tax on the capital gain at your marginal income tax rate, but the cost base on which the gain was calculated could be adjusted or should be adjusted by the CPI each year, right? So if inflation was 3% per year, then you increased it by 3%, and that reduced the amount you paid. End of 1999, they said, not going to have that anymore. We're going to make it just straight out 50%. That is to say, you only pay tax on half the capital gain. And so, okay, I mean, that's not a big change in money terms because, you know, you still were getting the discount of the inflation. So it wasn't from 0 to 50%, it was from whatever it was. But what I think happened then was a big change in the way people thought about investing in housing because no one really gets the CPI. Certainly nobody could figure out, even experts can't really, in their mind, in their head, figure out what the CPI is going to be over the time you held the asset, right?
Absolutely.
You can't. But everyone understands a 50% discount,
Yeah.
right? And so all of a sudden it was like, oh, I get it. That's good. That's good.
So reducing a barrier to entry.
It just kind of made everyone think about that. And the reason that change was done in 1999 was as a result of a review of business taxation by 3 businessmen, John Ralph, Rick Ellett and Bob Joss, right? And they were asked to go and do a business tax review. And the purpose of that was to provide some cover because John Howard and Peter Costello wanted to cut the company tax rate from 36 to 30%. And they wanted these guys to tell them that was a good idea, which they duly did, of course, because they were businessmen. And, you know, they thought that was a lovely idea. And so, but they also came up with this idea, well, let's change the capital gains tax to 50% discount instead of inflation adjustment in order to get people to invest in shares. So they actually specifically in the review, if you read, you can actually find the review online if you want to, and it says in there, we want to change it to 50% discount to encourage people to buy shares, and we'll turn Australia into a nation of share owners. How good will that be? But what happened was 3 months later, the stock market crashed.
Right.
Because the internet bubble finished in March 2000, right? Stock market crashed. No one wanted to invest in shares anymore.
Confidence went to property.
All went to property. So, bang. In the 3 years from 2000 to 2003, Australian house prices rose 45%. Massive boom in house prices. I think it was a direct result of the capital gains tax discount being introduced. And then after that, on housing affordability, immigration increased massively. After 2005, immigration doubled, and then it went to 200,000, then went to 300,000. So big increase in immigration, no increase in housing construction, shortage of housing. So that then, you know, meant that as the effect of the capital gains tax change faded, the increase in immigration kept the boom in house prices going. And so, we've had 25 years now of house prices essentially on average increasing at faster than incomes, and now we've got this problem. I do think that the starting point for dealing with it is to take the capital gains tax back to the way it was.
Yep.
So nobody understands what's going on anymore. So
You laugh, but I said to Dan, could you provide us with a simple explanation of how it would work? And he looked at me and said, I don't think you can.
no, well, it's just whatever the CPI is, you get it, you add it to the thing, you add it to your cost base, so that it reduces your capital gains tax to that extent. And it is true that the 50% discount is greater than almost all calculations of the inflation adjustment. So 50% discount is better than inflation adjustment. Going back to the way it was is an increase in capital gains tax. That is true.
Right, gotcha. Because that's the punchline that everyone wants to know, right? Is are we? Because you have some people saying, well, it depends on inflation over the time and how long you've held the asset.
Yeah.
But in the main, we are entering into an environment where you are likely to pay more capital gains than you were under the old rule. And
that is especially true if you're a low income earner, because what they've done at the same time, unexpectedly and in a sense a bit mysteriously, they've said also the minimum tax on a capital gain is 30%.
Right.
So that means that if you are on a lower income and your marginal tax rate is 16%, or even if you're on you're earning less than $18,500, so you're under the tax-free threshold, so your tax is zero. That means if you make some money from a capital gain of any sort, whether it's shares or property or whatever, you're going to pay more on that capital gain than you do on your employment income.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting. That's a change. And the other thing, of course, they did was to say that negative gearing is only available on new houses, which I think that's fine. I mean, that's a decent idea. That'll hopefully encourage more building of new houses, which is what we want.
Which supply side is what we need. It's interesting, and Dan, I'll throw one to you if I can. A lot of the dialogue that's out there at the moment is all focused on housing. It's about housing affordability, and that's right. I mean, it is, for all the reasons you've laid out, is something that we need to focus on. But the thing is that CGT applies to not only housing, but investments in shares. And we know from especially whether it's parents of younger members or younger members reaching out to us directly, said, well, hang on a second, I'm using ETFs or share market or whatever the case might be to save for my first house. You've actually then just applied potentially a higher tax, or what's being talked about as a higher tax to my savings. Dan, is there anything else? What would you say to a younger member or a parent of a younger member that's wanting to save for a house?
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about how this will affect younger Australians, but it's important, I think, to think about there are some really good schemes that are available for younger Australians to buy their first home, available already. And the first one is the First Home Super Saver scheme, and that's where you can contribute tax effectively by concessional contribution into your super. So for a lot of people, you can still save tax effectively $15,000 per year and up to $50,000. So in 3 years, you can potentially have tax effectively saved your $50,000 or a little bit over 3 years. And then from there, provided you meet the rules, you may be able to withdraw those funds out and then utilise the government's 5% deposit scheme, which then allows you to potentially take that amount of money that you've saved tax effectively, invest that into a property that meets the requirements, and only have to pay a 5% deposit instead of having to come up with that 20% deposit, meaning you're not paying mortgage lenders insurance. So there really is a path for younger Australians, but there are some things to think about. Is once you get to that point, you've only got 5% equity in your property. If we're looking at potentially prices going down, higher interest rates, higher cost of living, it puts those people who have saved up for that in a bit of a vulnerable position. So you just got to be mindful that it's a great pathway, but it leaves you a little bit exposed potentially.
Yeah, so it's a really good one, and it's a really important risk to actually call out in the current context, because housing affordability is talking like it's another term for how expensive houses are. Right?
Yeah.
So the ambition is actually to take some of the steam out of that market. Maybe housing prices, I've seen some headlines today say that they'll hold steady. We've seen news where it's saying they're already declining in price. So it is going to have an impact on housing prices. So while, the First Home Super Scheme, I always get that acronym wrong, is a great place to save, this 5% equity and only having 5% equity in your home, 95% lending, and suddenly housing prices drop, that's a real risk for people, right? I mean, the probability of, what would you say housing prices are likely to do with all of these changes coming in?
Well, house prices are in the process right now of falling. Melbourne house prices have fallen by 3 or 4% already. Sydney, they're falling, not quite as much. So look, over the past 20 years, I think house prices have fallen. Overall, house prices have fallen between 7 and 9% 3 times. That's the sort of thing that happens to Australian house prices. They don't always just go up. Sometimes they fall.
Yeah.
And they're about to fall. That's true.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think the whole thing's a bit of a lesson in, if you're saving, whatever you're saving for, whether it's for retirement or something else, it's probably not a good idea to bet, to do that saving, betting. What you've got to do with saving is to use compound interest. You've got to give the returns that your super fund or the market or whatever can provide you, and stick with it, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is that if you've invested in real estate over the past, 5 years, you are betting that because, as you say, we've been talking about unaffordable housing now for 5 years at least, right? Everyone's been on about it.
Yeah.
And there's been a national project, explicit national project, to do something about housing affordability since 2022, right? So that's 4 years ago. And so if you invested, if you've invested in real estate, residential real estate over the past 4 years, you're betting against the governments of Australia.
Absolutely.
And when they sat down in 2022 to come up with the National Housing Accord, it wasn't just the federal government and all the states who were there. It was all the super funds as well. I mean, I don't know specifically whether CareSuper was there, but they probably were. So around the table were all the Australian governments, all the big super funds, and all the big property industry bodies, and they sat around and they decided, okay, we're going to fix this. We're going to we're going to make sure that 1.2 million houses are built over 5 years. We're going to, in general, deal with housing affordability. So after that, if you bought a house after that with the intention of making money out of it, you're betting against them.
Yeah.
And I think that's a bit of a big bet.
It's at the moment, it's really interesting because when we talk about shares, everybody knows the bets that they're making, and shares are bought and sold on a minute by minute, day by day if they're listed, and you can buy and sell them on the market whenever you want. And you see those prices moving day by day. You don't see that with a property because your property is only worth what someone is willing to pay for it, but you don't buy and sell it every day, nor do your neighbours where you can compare it to. So It's really hard to have that transparency. So there's always this feeling that it's going up. But the truth is it moves. They move up and down all the time.
But it is true that the thing is that the house prices have always gone up for the last 25 years, especially, right? Yeah. So it has been a good bet overall, apart from those periods when they've fallen by 7 and 9%. But the thing is that what we're talking about with housing affordability is not just a brief 7% fall, as we've had before, with house prices then bouncing back as they have before. What we're talking about is long-term no change to house prices. That's the only way that we're going to fix housing affordability, is if house prices actually don't change for 20 years. That means that housing now is probably a lousy investment.
Yeah.
It's just forget about it. I wrote a piece the other day saying it's time to forget about property as an investment. Just forget about it. It's not going to do anything for a long time because all these things are going on. Firstly, interest rates are going up. Secondly, they've changed the CGT rules. Thirdly, they've changed negative gearing rules. Also, immigration is falling. No matter what Pauline Hanson and Angus Taylor say, the fact is immigration is coming down, perhaps not as fast as they want and some people might want. And housing starts, that is to say the building of new housing, is rising. it's taken a while, and the National Housing Accord didn't result in a big burst of new houses being built over the first couple of years, but it's now starting to have an impact, right? And so all these factors, supply is rising, demand is falling, taxes changing, interest rates are going up. I reckon all that means house prices are going nowhere.
Yeah. And I mean, it's obviously very different. If you own your home, it's where you reside, it's what gives you financial security. I mean, that's a different equation and a different contemplation. There's a lot more to think about when you're buying the place that you live in, versus we're talking more as an investment. And there's lots of other vehicles that you can invest in, not only other assets, but obviously different places that you can invest. We've got a question come through, and bear with me while I draw the link between those two things. But they've said they're 66 and they're asking how CGT rules will impact them if they're selling shares. But I think CGT affects property or shares, but in particular shares. And what should they be aware of? I think it's really important to spell out, okay, depending on where you invest, and Dan, I'm going to come to you on this one, where you invest, what type of tax you pay. So obviously you've got in your own name, you can do it through trusts, which has obviously been talked about, but there's also super. Do you want to talk about the difference in the tax systems?
Yeah, thanks. So going to what Alan was saying is it looks like there will be higher taxes on some of the investments outside of super. So I think that generally with planning, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find the structure that suits the members that we're working with the best. And holding investments outside of super gives you access, but we're looking at potentially higher taxes. So for members who are prioritising lower taxes as their priority, well, super still remains one of the most tax effective vehicles that we have. So I think we'll see that people will prioritise that over taking some of those risks outside of super because of the simplicity and the tax effectiveness. But it's important to remember that investing into super, you've got to take into account access. So we're getting tax incentives by doing that, but you may not be able to access it until 60. Your primary residence is tax-free generally. So I think we'll see that people will gravitate to potentially focusing on those more than taking on other investments. But again, just generally speaking, but overall, we want to get you into the most tax-effective environment. And as the rules change, that will change. And it's just a matter of assessing where you're at with the rules so we can bridge that gap and find the best structure for you.
Yeah. So essentially what we're saying is it's a little bit complicated now in how CGT might be calculated. It's your asset base is linked to inflation over the time that you hold it and then discounted from there versus just a flat 50%. And then a minimum of 30% if it's in your own name. So that's if you hold the asset in your own name. You can also hold them through trusts, but there's also some changes there, and the minimum tax on distributions out of that is also 30% now. If you're inside super, if you're in the accum phase, it's
a 15% tax on the earnings and growth.
Yep. And then if you flick it into pension,
it's 0% tax. So that's kind of the ultimate goal, is once we get you into that tax-free account-based pension environment, your super will be completely tax-free. So that's a really good outcome.
And when can you do that?
You can do that from between 60 and 65 generally, depending upon the conditions, but you'll definitely be able to do that at 65. So you can move it into completely tax-free environments. Depending upon the amounts, there's limits that can be held in the tax-free environments, but a lot of people will fit in that range.
Great.
And don't forget, with the CGT changes, they start on July the 1st, 2027, so next year, it's a year off. And the capital gains up to that point will still be subject to 50% discount.
And there was one in there as well, which may be relevant for some people online. There was like a grandfathering rule that's going away.
That's what I was talking about. Right. So it's grandfathered. It starts on January 1st next year.
Right.
And any capital gains up to that point are grandfathered, or at least
Gotcha.
The old rules apply. So they're not retrospective.
Perfect.
So even the pre-CGT assets will be accessible now.
That's right. Pre-1985.
Yeah, they'll become accessible from next year.
Yeah.
Right. So explain this one for people. So if you've held an asset since before 1985, that's CGT exempt now.
Yep.
But if you hold it until after 1st July next year.
After next year, from next year, if I've got this correct, it will become accessible.
Yeah.
And you'll start paying gains from what comes into place from that point.
From that point, but not for the gains up to that point.
Yeah, from next financial year it starts.
Fabulous. Wonderfully confusing, and I'm sure everybody needs to get an accountant as well as a financial planner now. So it's done that industry.
Hopefully not.
We've had a follow-on question from housing. It seems that people are pretty keen to keep talking about that. And this is a great question. And I think I know the answer, but I'll let you explore it. You've literally written the book. Do you think Australians rely too heavily on housing as part of their financial plan?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think one of the things we need to get back to in Australia is, and around the world, to be honest, is that houses are a place to live, not some way to build wealth. And you know, I do think that the only real way to get for that to happen is for it not to be a way to build wealth for quite a long time. But yeah, I think that has been a problem. I think it is a problem. We need to build our wealth through super, mainly in Australia. We've got this fantastic system in Australia where 12.5% is going into super every year or every quarter or month or whatever, and it's compounding. It's great. I mean, what a system. I mean, forget the rest. I mean, the thing about the reason people love housing is because, apart from the fact that you can walk into the house and you can feel it and it's great, you can borrow more against it, right? So with you can't really borrow against your super. You can, but it's hard, and nobody wants to lend it to you anyway. And but you can borrow 80% of a house, so that means your 20% equity, can really increase rapidly.
Yes,
which is fantastic. And when the house prices are going up at 6% or 7% a year, which they have been, then you're really doing great. But I tell you what, I think that, as I said before, those days are gone. And we're going to now enter a period when housing is not a great investment.
Yeah. And most people, I'm sure people are aware, but just in case people aren't aware, you can borrow to invest in shares as well, possibly not to 80%.
No, only 50%. And people don't do it anyway. I mean, and I think it's fair enough. Shares are volatile. The trouble is, the share market has a habit sometimes of falling 30%.
Yeah.
And
then you have to pay that money.
Housing doesn't do that. I mean, that's the thing about it. The other thing about it, the reason people like housing is because it only falls 7% or 9% at most. Share market, crikey, you can really.
It can, and we've seen it. It tends to, over the long term, it's quite interesting. I mean, Dan, you talked to this a little bit. If you look back over the last 50 years, well, let's call it the last 25, that shares and property over that longer term, they perform relatively similarly. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
It's just if you're buying and selling on it, looking at it every day, it can be more alarming in the share market.
Well, that's it. I mean, the thing is, with your housing, with property, they don't quote the price every day, right?
No, but it is it's only worth what somebody else will come along and give you the money for.
Exactly.
And day by day, that'll change.
Precisely.
Yeah. Excellent. We've got another follow-on around the tax side of things, which is talking about super funds. And sorry, this is probably a link through that we didn't make earlier when we started talking about the first home buyers scheme as a viable alternative for people saving for a home, right? Was because the super funds have been sort of exempt from these new CGT rules. Did you want to have a chat to that one?
So the CG2 rules apply to it applies to individuals, partnerships, and trusts. Is that right? Hang on. But the CG2 rules don't apply to your superannuation. So we are under a different taxation system for that. So that won't be affected by your superannuation under these changes. So your superannuation is taxed the same way it was previously.
So it's exactly the same. So if you're in pension mode, tax-free status,
tax-free, yep.
Selling assets in that environment, it's tax-free.
That's correct.
Yeah. So thank you for that question. That was a great one. We've got another question coming through, and thank you. Keep them coming. These are wonderful. We want to answer what you've got on your mind, not what's on ours, although I could sit here and ask Alan a million questions. One that's just come through. Wages are forecast to grow, but many people still feel like they're going backwards. How should we interpret that? So wages, I think the more recent news is that the minimum wage is going up, and that's set by the government, isn't it? Is there a dialogue around wages being forecast to grow?
Yeah. So well, it's good if businesses are complaining, which they're doing. So all the business groups are now whinging about the wage decision the other day, which is great. So we know, so that's fine. The most recent data from the ABS on wages growth was 3.3%, which is something called the Wage Price Index they produce every quarter. And that, as I say, was 3.3%. The most recent data on the Consumer Price Index was 4.2%. So therefore, that will tell you that wages are going up less than prices. Obviously, everyone's wages are different. That's an average across the whole country. So some people's wages go up more than inflation. Some people's wages don't go up at all, like mine. Haven't gone up at all. Damn it.
You should talk to yourself about that.
I know. Anyway, now this is the ABC, so the ABC's got no money. Anyway, leaving that aside, so inflation, then you had the wage decision, which was an increase. I'm just trying to remember what it was now. There was an amount for the minimum wage, and there was also an amount for award wages, all of which seemed to be about roughly or a bit more than the CPI. So I was in the mid 4%, I think. So that's good as well. So that's an increase, and everyone's kind of happy with that, I guess. So, but look, if you feel like you're going backwards, you probably are. That's true.
Yeah, and that's inflation talking. That's cost.
Costs are going up, and obviously also, that CPI thing of 4.2%. That is across all prices. Depends what you buy. Clearly, I mean. You can actually go into the ABS website and look at each category and know what's lamb gone up and what's eggs gone up. All this, I mean, depends what you buy.
Yeah, brilliant. This is a great question, and thank you. I would get a lot more interest. I get a lot more interest. I mean, I think that means interest earned in a term deposit than I would if I put money into super. Even considering the tax, why would I add more money into super? I mean, it's an awesome question, and I think an interesting way to think about this is not necessarily in the return that you look at, but it is actually super is just a tax structure at the end of the day. It's a highly efficient one.
But that's not true, is it? I mean, what's the super returns are like 7.5% or something?
Depending upon the option. So if you're investing into a cash, you're going to get a cash return. You can get a cash return inside your super as well. So your super, you can vary your option. So you could go into a low risk option similar to cash. You could go into a high risk option that has a lot of exposure to shares, and you'd expect a higher long-term return. So I think for that answer, it's yes, you can hold it in cash outside super and you'll get a set return, but there's all of these other considerations around taxation. But inside super, you can still do that, and it's in that tax-free environment. So there are benefits and you can still get a similar return.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to that balance of what risk you're willing to take, and what sort of time horizon you've got. I mean, how can they come in? I mean, it's about what you choose to invest in, right?
But it's a pretty lousy super fund that's making less than the term deposit.
Term deposit. Absolutely.
I mean, you would. You picked the dud there.
Well, and from there, so again, if a member's thinking about investing into cash and how do they do it in their super, well, they don't need to figure that out on their own. They can access our financial planners who can assess, their investment time frame, their particular ability to tolerate volatility. Maybe it's not appropriate to invest in cash. Maybe it's appropriate to take a little bit more risk to try and increase that return over the longer term. And we can do that at no extra cost because it's included in their membership.
And it's important also to understand that cash and term deposits are actually two different things. A term deposit is cash that you give to somebody else to use for a fixed period of time, which is why they give you a bit more interest than just having it in a more fluid or liquid version of a cash investment. So it is really important to come and have a chat. Super is a tax structure that is incredibly tax efficient for a multitude of reasons, even before these new CGT rules. It's a great place to save, but you've got to be really careful about when you're doing that, because as Dan raised before, if you're doing it before you're age 60, then it's really hard to get your money out again. Certainly when you get to that magic age where it's a tax-free environment, it's a great one. But choosing which assets you go into, there's always someone who can help you out with that. There is a couple of more general questions coming through, which I think are really good. And so we've had several, so I'm going to bundle them up into one sort of question for Alan. What do you think the one thing Australians are worrying about too much financially?
Oh,
it's a good one.
What is the worrying about too much? Heavens, I don't really know.
I can give one. I think we're worrying too much about all the noise at the moment. I think
there you go.
From a financial planning.
I wish I'd said that.
There you go. Yeah. No, but from a financial planning perspective, we can't prepare. We don't know what's going to happen, but we know that we are invested for a long time. Like, you're a retiree, we've got 20 years potentially. So all of this noise, there's so many commentators saying all of these things, and and it's great, but realistically, we can prepare for this. We don't know what's going to happen, but we can actually build in safeguards into your plan. So I would say try not to listen to too much of the noise, and let us help you bridge the gap so that it's less confusing for you.
Forget the noise. I agree.
Forget the noise. Awesome. Excellent. All right. We've got one last question for you. I think we've got time for just one more. What do you think is the economic trend that will define the next decade?
Next decade. I think the biggest thing for the next decade is definitely AI, in my opinion. It is so big. It is going to change everything, really. I mean, I think, so no one knows really what's going to do, how many jobs it will displace. You know, there are estimates of between 0 to 100%, and I'm one of the many people who doesn't know what it's going to do, but I do know that it's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
So, I think that's the main thing. Obviously, in the short term, what happens in Iran and the Strait of Hormuz is a big deal. Because if the Strait of Hormuz stays closed, then the world's in a bit of trouble. I think there will be recessions, and that will be serious. At the moment, I don't think anyone really believes that will happen. Surely Donald Trump will take his medicine, and basically do a taco, as they say, or Trump always chickens out, and then he'll basically just get out, But who knows?
Who knows? Yeah.
But apart from that, it could be. I mean, particularly in terms of the markets and super and all that. I mean, that's really comes down to AI. What happens? We've got three big IPOs, public floats coming up: SpaceX, Anthropic, and OpenAI. That's going to be a huge deal this year when they're going to be more than $1 trillion each. There's never been even one IPO of more than $1 trillion, let alone three at once.
Three, yeah.
I mean, that's
fascinating.
That's going to soak up a huge amount of liquidity from the market. These things are going to go into the indexes, right? Into the main indexes. It means that all of the super funds are going to have to buy them. What are they going to sell in order to buy them? It's. Yeah.
There feels like there's a seismic shift happening in all sorts of places with that.
That's right. We're in the middle of a technological revolution like we've never seen before, really. I mean, it's. I've been trying to. I mean, I'm so interested in it, possibly boringly, but I've been trying to figure out, firstly how these things work. And secondly, how does the business model work? How do they make money? What's going on?
It's a great unknown. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm getting there.
It's truly. I don't think I've heard a word. It was blockchain for a little while. I don't know if you remember. Blockchain was going to change our world for a little while, and now it's AI. But AI is so pervasive. It's everywhere. It's all aspects of life. I know I'm an avid user, not a power user, but I don't mind it.
So everyone is. This is the thing. Everyone's using AI now. I mean, and all companies are using it, right? Yep. So all these companies are using AI, and you say to them, well, how many people are you going to sack now? And they say, oh, no, it's all right, we're not going to do that. And it's like, oh, yeah, I'm not sure I believe that. I mean, that'd be good if it was true, but I don't know.
Yeah, time will tell. I just want to say such a big thank you. I mean, it's been such a wonderful. We've covered so much territory, and it's been a wonderful chat. So thank you very, very much, Alan.
I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Obviously, there's been a lot. So thank you all for the questions. They're coming through at a rate of knots. We will make sure, again, if you've asked something a little bit personal, if you want to, we can certainly get an advisor to give you a call back. I know there's a lot of advisors sitting here waiting to take any questions that you might have. And I think it's always really great to make sure that you engage. If you're feeling like you're unsure of the answers or unsure about what the changes are going to have, the impact to have on you, just the process of sometimes going through, having a chat to someone and even getting somewhere to start does make you feel a lot better and like you're back in control of your money and your time. So please reach out. It is We have variations of advice here that are actually just included in your membership fee, all the way through to comprehensive advice where you can actually take into consideration assets outside of super and the rest. So please, I think there is a QR code coming, or there is a link on the screen now. Please take a photo of that. We're all very good at QR codes these days. I think COVID gave them a renaissance. Use it, make sure that you come through and get some assistance. We are here to help you for sure. One thing we're also going to give you a post-event survey. If you've liked what we've done, we can certainly give the feedback to Alan too, if you like. Please make sure that we want to be able to do more of this. We want to hear what you're thinking. This is very much about answering the questions that you have, not just what we want to tell you. So please give us the feedback on the survey. Definitely, if you want to visit the website, if you want some more information, we'll be also posting this webinar to that as well. But before I wrap today, we've got something actually really quite exciting that we want to share also. We, as you can imagine, as a super fund, we're quite obsessed about retirement and thinking about it. But we also know that retirement is not just a date. It's an incredibly big transition for people. It's that moment you wake up and realise that you've actually got control of your time and you get to choose what you do with it. And that's a really exciting thing, but it comes with a hell of a lot of questions, decisions, a whole lot of what next, especially in the context of what's going on at the moment. So what we've done is we've created a 7-week program to help you sort of navigate some of those decisions and step into that chapter feeling really confident. It's called No More Mondays, and I think that's a great name. It means that you get to wake up on a Monday and do what you want with your time rather than ditching the alarm clock and choosing your day. Across the program, you'll hear from all sorts of experts. You'll get really practical insights, and we'll focus on what really matters when you're thinking about it. So your money, your super, your lifestyle, what you use your time for, and how to plan ahead so it all comes together and you can step into that next phase with confidence. It kicks off on Monday, the 3rd of August, and registrations are now open. So if this sounds like something you'd love to be part of, grab your phone. Again, the QR code is on screen, or head to caresuper.com.au, No More Mondays, and secure a spot. So thank you again for joining us. Big thank you again to Alan. Thank you, Dan. And again, a big thank you to our members for jumping online and asking so many great questions. We look forward to doing it for you again soon.